States' rights. Did you know that a governor can declare war? Governor can declare war, okay? And we're gonna probably see that.
Okay, that is Michael Flynn, former, yes, national security advisor to Donald Trump before we figured out, oops, he works for a foreign government. Oh well, and then of course he was pardoned for lying to the FBI by Donald Trump, outgoing President Donald Trump. There he is at a campaign event for Mark Finchem, the Republican candidate for Arizona's Secretary of State, who, if you didn't know, has been cozying up with election deniers, conspiracy theorists, and QAnon supporters throughout his run. And Mike Flynn himself is a where we go one, we go all, let's gather the whole family and take photos on 4th of July, because we believe this conspiracy theory that maybe we made up as well. Flynn has been known to pitch crazy conspiracies and military uprisings on numerous occasions, and he stayed true to form, demanding that, quote, 90% of federal agencies be disbanded. Just lock them up, Flynn exclaimed to the cheering crowd. Once again, he should probably be the one locked up considering his 2 felonies. But anyway, he's just saying, yeah, a governor can declare war. Is that true for anyone who cares? No, in fact, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the US Constitution, just a small little very small book, a small read, states that it is Congress that has the power to declare war, to raise and support armies, and to make rules for the government regulation of land and naval forces. If the United States was to wage war, then Congress would have to pass a resolution in both chambers, then present it to the president, who shall then direct the military as commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. And even then, it might not be legal. Hello, Iraq and Afghanistan, most likely. Why does any of this matter? Why do we care that Michael Flynn, ahead of the midterms, in stumping for a Secretary of State in Arizona, is ginning up all of this states' rights BS? Well, that's because even though Donald Trump was unsuccessful in overturning the election in 2020, the die has been cast. And I wanna, before I get Cenk to weigh in, I wanna just go to this recent poll that shows how much misinformation, how much mistrust that has been sown in the last 2 years about our elections on a state level, on a federal level. It wasn't the stealing of the 2000 election by W. Bush and Roger Stone and company, although that should have done it. No, it was the false stealing of the election under Trump. So this is a new Yahoo News YouGov poll showing that less than half Americans, 46%, now believe that candidates should commit in advance to accepting the results of this year's midterm election. Instead, a majority say that either candidate should not, or that they're not sure. So in other words, do you, just like Trump was asked, will you commit to honoring the results of the 2020 election? And he was cagey, effectively saying, well, I'm gonna win it anyway. And if I heads I win, tails you lose, as Bernie Sanders called it. But then among Trump supporters, it's even creepier. So just 44% say they agree with the proposition that the candidate with the fewer votes should concede the election. That meaning the candidate that lost. Nearly as many Trump voters, 38%, that the candidates with fewer votes at the end of the process should continue to challenge the results. Another 18%, not really clear. So that is keep on fighting even though you've lost. And then finally, just broadly, what happens, what do Americans think about what should happen after the election's over? Votes have been counted, what should we do? Well, take a look at this graph. 55%, the candidate with the fewer votes should concede the election is 55% of US adults, which is not a great stat. That means 55% are like, yeah, you should concede. 21% say the candidate with fewer votes, in other words, the loser, should continue to challenge the election if they believe it was wrongly decided. Another 23% say they don't know. And then, of course, Trump voters, only 43% of Republicans think losers should concede, with 37% saying, nah, they should challenge the election. And there is more I wanna dig into, but just at this point, I mean, it's all been destroyed effectively. Our faith in any kind of democratic institution. Cenk, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that both of these issues, whether you should challenge an election and whether you should arrest people involved in politics, require a little bit more of an explanation. Because, and in fact, I think this particular poll, except for one part that is just stunning and terrible, which I'm going to get to in a second, is a little misleading because it says, will you accept the results of an election ahead of time? Well, I don't blame some people for saying, well, it depends, doesn't it? I mean, so for example, there's that election in North Carolina for US Congress where the Republican who turned out had just flat out cheated and they had to redo the election. So that's why here, I'm gonna read graphics 7 and 8 to give you some nuance there. And on the arrest and Michael Flynn, the lunatic Michael Flynn, there's also some nuance there, believe it or not. So first, let me go to graphic 7. They explain, presented with an array of choices, by far the largest number of US adults, 62%, say that demanding a recount, a familiar and widely accepted form of redress, is legitimate. Likewise, 30% say filing a suit in court, also legitimate. So I would be in that 62%, I would be in that 30%, and I think that the 30% should be a much higher number. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking for a recount, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to court if you think something went wrong. Now, what a lot of Republicans don't understand is that Trump actually did do those things and he got those things. So for example, in Georgia, they recounted 3 times, including a hand recount. He lost every single one of them, but almost no MAGA person knows that. They think they never recounted any of the states. That's not true. Everywhere he asked for a recount, he got a recount. And then they think, oh, well, yeah, you should be able to go to court. I agree with you, brother. Like, oh yeah, you don't want him to go to court. No, I do. He went to court 60 times, lost all 60 times. So if you've got an actual issue with an election, which is certainly possible, there's a legitimate way to do it. And there is a legal way that is actually explained in our laws on how to do it. Now, let's go to graphic 8, which explains the illegitimate ways that some people are in favor of. They say, all right, well, 10% of Americans said that they would demand that state legislatures refuse to certify the results. Well, that's nuts. That's just saying, I'm gonna take my ball and go home. I don't care who won. I'm just gonna cheat at the state level. 9% of Americans say declared the election illegitimate. Well, that's not a thing. You go through the courts and find out if it is or it isn't. 8% of Americans selected demand that election officials overturn the results. Based on what, right? If you don't have any evidence, then what would they you just want to win? That's all, just cheat again? But the last one is the most concerning by far. 5% of Americans encourage supporters to take up arms against the government. And remember, that's not 5% of Republicans, it's 5% of Americans. The number of Republicans is much higher. But okay, let's take the number of Americans because it's easy math on that. We have over 330 million people in this country. That means there are a giant number of people, okay? 33 million is 10%, so about over 16 million people in this country now think if you lose an election, you should shoot the other side. You or the government.
Even I can do that math. I did that a little bit, and that's scary. I wish I was worse at math. I didn't understand. That's enough people. I mean, considering the amount of firearms we have in this country, that's insane. I mean, I also think, Cenk, that this is being asked sort of cagily. Like everyone knows that when you're asking voters, that the last thing in their mind is the 2020 election. So you're sort of asking them about Trump, even if you're not directly asking them about Trump, in my opinion. But I agree with you that it is totally fine to want to recount 62%. I would be in that 62% as well. I am a little more cautious when I see the 38% of Trump voters saying that if you've got fewer votes, that you should keep on challenging the results. There's a point at which you need to stop challenging the results, and there is a percentage at which you should absolutely not demand that you won.
Yeah, of course, and you're absolutely right about your interpretation of it, and the bigger number is concerning because it's clear that a giant percentage of Republicans are saying, I don't care if we lose, I just want to say we won and overturn it by any means necessary. which then leads us back to the violence. Look, it turns out human beings are very easy to influence, and the right wing is even easier to influence. So they've now gotten them to believe all sorts of insanity. The Democrats are baby killers and drink the brain juice of children, and Tom Hanks and Bill Gates and Fauci are involved. And yeah, that's a giant number. That's not, oh, ha, ha, he. That's like 3 people in the country. No, it's a number of people who believe QAnon. This was like a year ago. The number is increasing as we go, as David Schuster explained in our earlier hour. Was 15% of the country. 15% of the country believes that all those people that I just talked about, like, oh, crack open the skulls of babies and drink their baby juice. Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, just because somebody suggested it online, and then others in right-wing media have backed it up. They believe anything Trump says. I mean, Trump says insane things, and he says the FBI planted these documents and I put them there myself. Well, those two things don't make any sense. It's internally inconsistent. They go, that's goddamn right, the FBI planted it, and he had it already, right? So when they start talking about violence, it's getting into the right wing's heads, and they're beginning to believe that it's legitimate. That's why you're seeing the poll numbers that you're seeing. So this brings us back to Michael Flynn. So in terms of arresting people that are involved in politics, is there a blanket rule? You should, you shouldn't. No, that's not how it works. The rule is, did they break a law or didn't they break a law? So for example, Israel has arrested several former prime ministers because they broke the law on corruption. That's good, that makes sense. And that you should give Israel credit for that, for running an honest government, even for the elite, right? In that case, okay? Not in other cases, but at least in that case, right? And so if you have clear evidence of someone breaking the law, you should apply the law equally, even if they're a very powerful politician. On the other hand, just arresting your political opponents because they're your political opponents is what dictators do, and is the very opposite of what America should stand for. And you heard Flynn in that clip. He's like, why don't we just get rid of 90% of the people who work in the federal government? And then he said, lock them up.
Yep.
Lock them up for what? For working in the federal government? He's just saying, I don't like them. They're my political opponents. So I'd like to arrest them because I want a dictator in charge. And if that wasn't clear enough, he then talks about how governors can declare war. First of all, I mean, the guy's got everything wrong with him. I mean, he's totally mentally incompetent. You didn't look up that governors can't start wars? He's one of the 3 dumbest people in the country. Like, you didn't even look that up, you goddamn moron? It's so unbelievably painfully stupid, right? But on top of that, he's basically declaring that he hates America. He despises America. He doesn't want the federal government to be able to declare war. He wants the governors to be able to declare war against one another. He doesn't want the federal government at all. He wants to lock up 90% of the federal government. He doesn't want the person who won the election to be the president. He wants to get rid of, he suggested in a meeting with Donald Trump, according to reporting, that Trump should declare martial law and grab the voting machines. So he's basically saying, I want a dictator, I despise America, I despise our democracy, I loathe our Constitution. And this guy was a general? Please, it's exactly those kind of guys who try to do coups. How do we know? He just tried one, declaring martial law in America and seizing voting machines, so the guy who lost is declared the winner. That is a coup. Michael Flynn is an awful, awful human being. And just, if you love America, you should know that people like Michael Flynn are trying to destroy this country. He's the worst of the worst.
And it completely echoes what Roger Stone said before the election. It echoes what Steve Bannon said before the election. These are Trump's top and closest advisors saying, just declare that you won and strong arm the rest. And I think the question that was missing from this poll, Cenk, was, do you actually just want a dictatorship? If Trump were in power, would you be okay with the United States being run by a dictator? And a lot of them would probably say yes.